The flames cracked softly as Clara stirred the pot with a carved wooden spoon, its handle worn smooth by years of making do. Her baby, Ruthie, no more than 6 months old, lay bundled in a threadbare shawl inside a wicker basket, her cheeks red from the cold. The plains were quiet, too quiet for Clara's liking, but she kept her eyes on the stew and not the horizon. It had taken her all morning to gather enough roots and wild barley to make this pitiful meal, and she refused to let fear ruin the only warm moment her daughter would have today. The wind tugged at her braid as she hummed something low and gentle. The pot hissed as it boiled over slightly, and she bent to lift it off the fire when the sound came. Hoofbeats. Not a gang, she prayed. Not again. She reached for the knife she always kept nearby, hands trembling not with fear but exhaustion. Then came the thud. A riderless horse bolted past her fire, reins flying wild, and there, just beyond the last patch of dry brush, lay a man. Face down, his coat bloodied and torn, the glint of a badge barely visible on his chest. She didn't scream. Clara had seen too much to scream anymore. Instead, she stood slowly, heart pounding, and stepped between him and her baby. "You alive?" she called out, but the man didn't stir. She edged forward, watching for breath. Closer now, she saw he was young, no more than 30, with rough hands and dark hair matted with dirt and sweat. His left leg was twisted beneath him, soaked in blood. "Damn it," she muttered, kneeling. "Why here?" She pressed her fingers to his neck. A pulse, barely, not dead, not yet. Behind her, Ruthie whimpered. Clara turned toward the fire, the stew, her child, her life, and then back to the dying man with a gun holster and a lawman's star. She could walk away. No one would know. But something in her, something buried but not broken, said no. She lifted his arm over her shoulder, grunted with the effort, and began dragging him toward the fire. "If you die," she whispered, "you'll die warm, not cold." The wind howled again. But this time Clara didn't flinch. She had made room for suffering before, and now she would make room for him. The smell of boiling stew drew him back before the pain did. Then the ache came in waves, through his leg, his ribs, his chest, like he'd been trampled, shot, and burned all at once. His eyes cracked open, dry and swollen, and all he saw was firelight flickering against a wall of stacked stones. He groaned low, unsure if he was alive or already somewhere worse. A woman's face loomed above his, stern, sharp-eyed, with strands of hair falling from a loose braid. She didn't look relieved to see him breathing. "You with me now?" she asked flatly. "Good. Don't bleed on the baby." He turned his head, confused, and there in a basket by the fire was the tiniest child he'd ever seen, staring at him with solemn eyes like she'd already lived through 2 wars. He tried to sit, and white heat shot through his thigh. "Don't move," she snapped. "Bullet's still in your leg. I got the bleeding slowed, but I ain't a doctor. I just keep people alive long enough for them to run again." He sank back, panting, voice hoarse. "Water?" She handed him a tin cup without a word. He drank greedily, then croaked, Who are you?" She raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. "Name's Clara," she finally muttered. "That's Ruthie, and you're the one who collapsed at my feet like a sack of bad luck." He gave a dry cough that might have been a laugh. "Name's Eli," he said. "Marshal Eli Creighton. Or I was." "Don't care much for marshals," Clara said, standing. "But I won't let a man die if I can help it. So eat your stew, don't ask questions, and don't make me regret dragging you into my camp." Her words were cold, but the quilt she'd tucked under his shoulders was warm. Ruthie let out a soft coo, and Eli looked at her again, then at Clara, and something in his chest shifted. painful, but not the kind that bled. "Where are we?" he asked. Clara crouched near the fire, stirring the pot. "Nowhere worth naming. Just a stretch of prairie nobody fights for." He let that sit, then said quietly, "Someone was chasing me. Won't stop just because I fell." Clara didn't flinch. "Then you'd best heal fast, Marshal, 'cause if they find you here, you won't be the only one they finish." And in the flickering light, Eli realized she wasn't scared. Not of blood, not of men. And maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all. The fire had long died down when Clara heard the hooves. 3 of them, no more, no less, moving slow and deliberate across the hard-packed dirt like men who knew what they were hunting. She didn't look at Eli. His breathing was rougher now, more shallow, and she'd only just managed to stop the fever from setting in. Ruthie was still asleep in her basket, wrapped tight in the folds of Clara's old Sunday dress. Clara rose, knife in hand, and stepped outside into the wind. The night stretched wide around her, stars sharp as glass in the sky. The riders came into view slowly, dark shapes on horseback, dust trailing behind them even in the moonlight. One lifted a hand. "Evening, miss," he called. "We're tracking a man. Wounded lawman likely headed this way. You seen anything?" Clara stood still. "Plenty of men crawl across these plains," she replied. "Most don't make it past the river." The rider nodded, his face too far to read. "This one's different. Took something that wasn't his. We aim to take it back." The second rider spat. "He's got a badge, but don't act like law. You sure he didn't pass by?" Clara's grip on the knife tightened behind her skirts. "Only thing passed by here today was a busted wagon wheel and a flock of crows. If your lawman's bleeding, I'd suggest you try south." The men exchanged glances. The third one, silent until now, leaned forward. "You live out here alone?" he asked slowly. Clara met his eyes and lied like she'd done it all her life. "Me, the baby, and God, and we're all better shots than you." A long silence followed. Then the leader gave a slow nod. "We'll ride south then. But if you see anything, you let us know. We pay for good information." "I don't sell what ain't mine," she said coldly. They turned and rode off without another word, their horses fading into the dark. Clara didn't move until the sound vanished completely. Only then did she step back inside. Eli was awake, eyes wide with sweat. "They're after me," he rasped. "You don't know what you've done?" Clara knelt beside him, her voice like flint. "I know exactly what I've done. I lied to devils to buy you one more night. Now you better live long enough to make it worth the risk." Ruthie stirred in her sleep, and outside, the wind picked up. Clara placed another log on the fire. She wasn't afraid, not yet. But she had just made herself a part of someone else's war. By morning, the fever had returned, and Eli was shaking beneath the quilt, his skin damp with sweat and his lips cracked and pale. Clara knelt beside him with a tin bowl and cloth, dabbing his forehead as he flinched from her touch. "You've got poison in that leg," she muttered. "I can feel the heat rising through the bone. That bullet's got to come out, or you'll be gone before sundown." He groaned something unintelligible. Clara didn't ask for permission. There wasn't time for mercy when death was already knocking. She boiled her knife in the stew pot, doused it with the last of her whiskey, then rolled up her sleeves. "Bite on this," she told him, stuffing a folded scrap of cloth between his teeth. "And if you scream, don't wake the baby." She worked fast, her hands steady despite the slick warmth of blood. The bullet was lodged deep, and each tug brought a moan that tore through Eli's throat like fire. But then, there it was, a dull, round thing flecked with rust and death. She dropped it in a pan and pressed a clean cloth to the wound. Eli passed out cold. Only then did she let herself breathe. Hours passed before he stirred again, blinking slowly as if the world had changed. "Why'd you do it?" he whispered. "You don't know me." Clara stared at the fire, her hands still red. "I don't need to know you. I just need to believe you're not the kind who'd make me regret saving you." He swallowed hard, then rasped, "I was escorting a prisoner." She ran. "They blamed me, said I was in on it." "I wasn't." Clara didn't answer. He went on, slower now. "She was just a girl, 15. They were going to sell her east. I cut her ropes, that's all." Clara turned her head at last, her eyes sharp. "That's not nothing, Marshall. That's everything." He met her gaze, then nodded once. "I had to try." Ruthie stirred in her basket, letting out a small sigh. Eli looked at the child for the first time with something deeper than surprise, something like reverence. "She yours?" Clara nodded. "Her father left before she was born, said the land was cursed. I said maybe it was just him." Eli smiled faintly. "I think I'm going to live." "Not if you keep talking," Clara said, but her voice had softened. The fire crackled again, and for the first time since he collapsed, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was safe. 2 days passed before Eli could sit up without biting down on a scream. By then, Clara had built a makeshift sling from an old tablecloth to help him hobble to the edge of camp and back. She said little, but her presence was constant, offering broth, changing his dressings, rocking Ruthie when the nights turned bitter. Eli watched her more than he spoke. She moved like a woman who'd survived more than she'd ever admit, each step careful but unflinching, each gesture soaked in practicality. She'd been hardened by the world, yet somehow hadn't let it turn her cruel. "You always live like this?" he asked one morning, sitting by the fire with Ruthie tucked against his good leg. "Out here alone?" Clara was stirring cornmeal, her braid tangled and her cheeks smudged with ash. "Alone's quieter. No one to ask questions. No one to let you down." "That ever get lonely?" he said. Her hand paused for half a beat. "Only when I let myself think about what could have been. So I don't." He looked down at Ruthie, who was gripping his finger now, her eyes half-lidded with sleep. "You saved my life. I don't think I've said thank you." "You haven't," Clara said, but there was a flicker of something light behind the words. "Didn't do it for thanks." "Still," he said quietly, "I owe you. And once I can walk straight again, I'll make it right." She shook her head. "Don't owe me anything. Just make sure the men who came looking for you don't find this camp again." Eli's jaw tensed. "They're not just after me. They're after something bigger, something I buried miles from here, evidence, names. There's a judge, 2 ranch owners, and a banker who made their fortune selling girls like the one I freed." Clara froze. "You're saying they'll keep coming?" "Yes," Eli said. "And if they find out you helped me—" "Then I'll deal with it," Clara said simply. "Just like I dealt with every storm, every sickness, and every man who thought a mother alone made easy prey." Eli looked at her differently then, not as a woman who saved him, but as someone forged in the same fire he'd barely survived. "When I leave," he said slowly, "I want to come back. Not for debt. For you." Clara didn't speak right away. She just handed him a bowl of food and said, "Eat before it gets cold, Marshall." But for the first time since his arrival, her smile lingered. Clara had just stepped away to gather water when Eli smelled it. Smoke. Not from the cook fire, not from pine or hickory. This was acrid, thick, and wrong. He struggled upright, pain burning through his leg as he crawled to the edge of the rocks shielding the camp. From there, He could see it. A black smear of smoke trailing upward against the morning sky, too far to touch, but too close to ignore. Someone had set a fire deliberately, and it wasn't for cooking. He called out, throat raw. "Clara." She emerged a moment later, bucket in hand, eyes narrowing at his tone. "What is it?" "Look." He pointed, breath shallow. She climbed the ridge beside him, saw the smoke, and cursed under her breath. "They're getting closer," Eli said. "Maybe they found another camp, or maybe they're drawing us out." Clara scanned the horizon. "It's 2 miles east, maybe more. Still time to move." "I can't ride yet," he reminded her. "I know." She looked down at Ruthie, who was bundled in a shawl, chewing the corner of a rag doll Clara had stitched from an old shirt. "Then we hide." That evening, Clara dismantled the fire pit and kicked earth over it. She hid Ruthie's basket beneath a pile of brush and packed what little they had, 2 canteens, a pocket knife, a pouch of dried food, into a knapsack. Then she helped Eli onto a crude crutch carved from a branch. "There's a dry creek bed just west," she said. "Leads into a ravine with caves. We'll stay there till they pass." Eli didn't ask how she knew such places. He was learning not to question the way she moved through the land, like it had once tried to swallow her whole, and she'd memorized every path out of its throat. The walk was brutal. Eli leaned on her more than he liked, wincing with each step. But she never flinched. Even Ruthie, strapped to Clara's back in a sling, seemed to understand silence was the only safe thing they had left. They reached the cave by dusk. It was shallow but dry, shielded by brush and stone. Clara lowered Ruthie gently, then helped Eli sit against the wall. "We'll stay till the moon's gone," she said. "Then we'll move again." Eli looked at her, something tight in his chest. "Why do all this?" She met his gaze. "Because you didn't leave that girl tied to a rail, and I won't leave you for the wolves." Outside, the wind shifted, and far in the distance, a horse cried once. Then silence. The next day broke slow, light barely creeping into the cave's mouth. Clara kept watch while Ruthie dozed on Eli's chest, her tiny fingers curled against his shirt. Clara's eyes hadn't closed all night. She didn't need sleep. She needed answers. So when she heard the snap of a twig outside the brush line, her knife was already in hand. Then a voice drifted low across the stones. "Clara Mayfield, you always did have a way of vanishing." Her blood ran cold. She stepped outside the cave, shoulders squared, and there he stood. Nathan Briggs, wearing the same red duster he'd worn the day he left her in labor and never came back. "You're supposed to be dead," she said. "Funny," he drawled. "So are you." His eyes flicked behind her. "But you got company now. Heard from some boys you were harboring a wounded lawman. Thought I'd see if it was true." Clara didn't flinch. "If it is?" Nathan stepped closer, hand resting on his revolver. "Then I got a trade to offer. That baby's mine, isn't she?" Clara didn't move. "She stopped being yours the day you left me bleeding in a shack with nothing but a candle and a prayer." Nathan's grin vanished. "You always had a mouth. Listen close, Clara. I'm working with men now. Real men, not drifters. That marshal in your cave stole something that ain't his. Give him up and I'll walk away. You and the brat get to live quiet." Behind her, Eli had risen, leaning on the cave wall, pale but steady. "You'll walk away?" he said. Nathan's hand went to his gun. "That depends." "You willing to bleed for a woman who's already been left once?" Eli stepped out fully now, placing himself between Nathan and Clara. "I didn't crawl back from death to let trash like you finish the job. You want me, fine, but leave her out of it." "Bold talk from a cripple," Nathan growled. Clara stepped forward. "You lay one hand on him, and you'll see just how much fire I've got left." Nathan blinked, then smirked. "Fine. You've made your bed." He turned slowly, tipping his hat. "I'll be back by nightfall, with men. Hope you're ready to burn with your hero." He disappeared into the trees like smoke. Eli sagged against the rock, breathing hard. Clara stood frozen, her fists clenched. "That was Ruthie's father," she said quietly. Eli looked at her, eyes full of something heavy. "Then we don't just have to run, we have to finish this." And this time, Clara didn't argue. Clara hadn't meant to come back to this place. Just beyond the canyon mouth, where the trees thinned into prairie again, sat the old storage shed. Half rotted now, roof caved in, crawling with ivy and silence. It was where Ruthie had been born, where Clara had screamed into the earth while Nathan disappeared into the dark, and where she had buried what was left of her illusions in a tin box beneath the floorboards. She moved quickly, Eli hobbling behind her, clutching a rifle he could barely hold. "You sure about this?" he whispered. "They'll be watching the camp, not some ruin 10 miles off," she replied. "But this ain't about hiding anymore." She stepped into the shed, each board groaning beneath her weight. It smelled like rust and old tears. She crossed to the corner, pried loose a plank with her boot, and reached into the dirt. Her fingers closed around cold metal. She lifted out the tin box and opened it. Inside, a folded letter in Nathan's hand. Proof of the deal he struck selling government trail maps to traffickers. A badge from the first marshal Nathan betrayed. And the gold ring he gave her 3 days before walking out. She shoved the box into her satchel. "This is what they're after," she said. "Nathan doesn't just want Eli dead. He wants this vanished." Eli looked down at the items, jaw clenched. "If we get this to Fort Harlan, the judge there can put every last one of them behind bars. But we have to survive the night." "We will," Clara said, eyes steady. "Because this time, I'm not the girl who begged him to stay. I'm the woman who watched a man fall bleeding and chose to save him." They set a trap. Clara laid out blankets near the cave mouth to look like a sleeping body. Eli took his rifle and climbed to the ridge above. Clara wrapped Ruthie close and waited behind the brush, knife in hand, heart hammering like it had years ago. But now, she didn't shake. Dusk came. Then footsteps. 3 men, laughing low. "Think she's still warm," one sneered. Clara moved like lightning. The first man didn't even see the knife. Eli fired from above. 1 shot, clean, dropped the second. The third turned and fled, but Clara ran him down, tackled him like a hawk on a rabbit, blade at his throat. "Tell Nathan," she hissed. "Next time I won't leave a throat to carry the message." She let him go. Bloodied and panting, he vanished into the dark. Eli limped down, shaking. "You all right?" "I'm not the one bleeding," she said. And in that moment, he realized. She'd already won. By the time Nathan returned, expecting Clara to be scared and cornered, all he found was a camp in ruins and a cave that looked long abandoned. He cursed into the wind, pistol drawn, his men spread wide across the brush like a net pulled too thin. But it was too late. Clara and Eli had already crossed the ridge, riding slow but steady beneath a sky turning amber. Ruthie slept against Clara's chest, her tiny breath warm against skin gone cold from days of survival. Eli's hand rested on the saddle horn, his rifle strapped behind him. He was pale, still weak, but upright. "You're sure the fort will believe you?" Clara asked as they rode. "I don't have to convince them," he said, nodding to the satchel. "Those letters, that badge, they'll do the talking." Clara was quiet for a long while. "You could have run, left it all behind." Eli glanced over. "So could you, but we didn't." They rode into Fort Harlan under moonlight. The gates opened slow, soldiers suspicious until Eli flashed his badge, bent and bloodied but still law. Inside the marshal's office, Eli placed the tin box on the desk of a gray-haired captain with eyes like winter steel. "There's more," Eli said. "Trafficking routes, names, towns that look clean but aren't. Nathan Briggs and the men behind him, they're all tied to this." Clara stood behind him, silent. The captain opened the box, read the letter, and something in his posture shifted. "You'll testify?" he asked. Eli nodded. Clara stepped forward. "So will I." The next days passed like thunder. Warrants were issued, names spoken aloud that had long been whispered, ranches burned, judges arrested. Nathan Briggs disappeared into the wind, but his empire cracked like dry earth under boot. Eli stayed near the fort for recovery, and Clara, though she swore she didn't like towns, rented a room 2 streets away. Each night he limped to her porch and held Ruthie until she slept, and each night Clara watched him, waiting for the world to turn again. One night, as fireflies danced along the rails, he said, "I could go east, start over." "You could," she said, "or you could stay." "Would that be all right?" he asked. "If I'm not whole yet?" Clara looked down at Ruthie, asleep on her lap. "None of us are whole, but we're still here." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And somewhere far off, where once there was smoke and blood and silence, the first stars blinked above a land that finally felt earned. Spring came slow to the prairie, but when it did, it arrived with color Clara hadn't seen in years. Wildflowers pushing through broken soil, bees returning to the grove behind the shed, and a warmth that seeped into her bones not just from the sun, but from something deeper. The cabin Eli built sat on a hill just west of Fort Harlan. It wasn't grand, but it was strong. Stronger than the one she'd given birth in, stronger than the man who once left her to weather the world alone. This time, the roof didn't leak, the floor didn't groan, and on the porch stood a chair for 3. Eli carved it himself during recovery, shaping it from pine with hands that still bore scars. Ruthie would climb into it each morning and demand stories, and Eli, now marshal again, officially reinstated, told them with a softness he never showed anyone else. Clara watched them often, a mug of coffee in hand, unsure how she'd come to this life, without ever daring to dream of it. "You think they'll come back?" she asked one morning, not looking at him. Eli, holding Ruthie in his lap, didn't pretend not to understand. "Maybe. Evil doesn't vanish. It hides. And if it finds us?" He turned to her then, steady. "Then it'll find 2 people who already walked through fire, and a girl who was born inside it." Clara smiled, slow and tired but true. She sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. Ruthie tugged at her braid and giggled. There were days when the quiet still unnerved her. After all, she had survived by motion, by vigilance. But this stillness was different. It wasn't emptiness. It was peace. The townsfolk had begun calling her Mrs. Creighton, though no papers had been signed. She didn't correct them. Names didn't matter as much as actions. And Eli showed up every day, with kind eyes, with a steady hand, with a promise unspoken, but always kept. That, she'd learned, was love. Not the kind that burns fast and disappears, but the kind that rebuilds in silence. That night, under a soft blue sky, Clara lit a lantern and sat alone for a moment. She thought of the girl she'd been, desperate, abandoned, holding a baby with one hand and a knife in the other. And she thought of the man who had collapsed at her feet when she had nothing left to give. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to him, not to herself, but to the fire. Because it hadn't just taken, it had made something new. and now she was no longer just surviving. She was home. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.